talk about that at the end of the program. How many have heard of her? Quite a few of you. That's terrific. It is an amazing story of sacrifice, of resilience, and ultimately triumph. You're going to learn about her ties to our area, especially New Albany. Again, we wanted to welcome the Historical League, and at the end of this, we're going to talk about a special rate for membership to the Frazier. We'll tell you more about that at the end of the program if you would like to become a member here. We want to get started with our guest speaker today, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years. I've always admired her own tenacity for telling diverse stories in history and making sure that history doesn't get erased, and telling all of our history, not just the history that flatters us. Dr. Yanoviak has a PhD in art history from the University of Louisville. I got to know her, and many of you I bet did as well, with her time at the Carnegie Center in New Albany. I bet a lot of you all, of course, remember her from that. She's now an officer for the James Graham Brown Foundation. So here we go with the story of Nurse Nichols. So please welcome Dr. Eileen Yanoviak.
Hi everyone. It's so wonderful to see such a crowd here today and so many familiar faces that I'll try to acknowledge as we move forward. If we move forward. Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you've seen this image before, I'm going to encourage you to look a little closer, but if you've never seen this image before, I'd like you to take a moment and look for someone who is markedly different than the others.
A little bit.
So you might have noticed that in this image of Civil War and Spanish-American War veterans from 1898, it was a reunion of the veterans in 1898 in English, Indiana. This group gathered, but right dead center amongst this crowd of men is the only woman and the only black person in this crowd. I can't stand her. I'm going to move a little bit. Is that going to mess you up? No. Is that going to mess you up, Steve, if I move a little bit?
No, you're good.
Okay. I can't stand behind a podium. So you'll notice that she is standing dead center. She is the star of this show. And she has got her beautiful gown on. She's got her hair coiffed, actually I can give you even a little closer view of her. She's got these beautiful drop earrings. She's got her cane because by this point in her life, she's ailing quite a bit. But she never missed these reunions. She would travel all over Indiana to be present with these soldiers because these soldiers mattered so much to her. And so did her service as a Civil War nurse. And she joined the Indiana 23rd Regiment, but I'll get to that point. Before we tell her story though, and it's one of two images of Lucy Higgs Nichols that we know of. And hopefully there's more, and this book will lead to more discoveries about her story, but it's only one of two images, and it's one that also propelled 20, 30 years worth of research. Some of the people in this room contributed a great deal to that research, and I'll tell you about them in a moment. But it really kind of kick-started with Pam Peters. Anybody in here know Pam? She's an amazing historian. She is like the keeper of history in Southern Indiana, and she keeps all of us continuing to be diligent stewards of this history. But Pam was doing a book on the Underground Railroad in Southern Indiana, and she was doing oral history interviews with the community, and she was interviewing this woman, Pearl Grundy Kimbrough, and Pearl told her that her son was living in the house of a woman who was formerly enslaved, escaped enslavement, joined the Indiana 23rd Regiment, and became a Civil War nurse. And that little Pearl, out of, no pun intended, from Pearl, began what was a multi-state multi-decade journey, including some of the people in this room. Sally, if you want to raise your hand, I need you to wave your hand. Sally was a big part of this story, and many of the other people who were at the Carnegie Center for Art and History. But it was Pam and Kurt Peters and Vic McGinnity, who was a history teacher in New Albany, that really did a decades-long research project. Without their research, I would not be here as an author. They were incredibly generous to bestow their primary source research upon me to allow me to write this story. And so how do we know about Lucy Higgs Nichols' story? And I like to emphasize this because we're in a place that holds historical objects. And the way we know about Lucy's story is through newspapers, certainly, through primary source documents that were uncovered in deed books, buried in courthouses, through census records, and a lot of really diligent digging to find this information. What's sort of tragic in this story is that we don't really have any words from Lucy herself. The way we know about Lucy's story is through the words of others, from the soldiers with whom she served, and through the documents that belonged to her enslavers. And so we spend a lot of our times as historians trying to fill in the gaps between what we know and what we can't know because we don't have Lucy's words. So I can't give you all of Lucy's history as a young enslaved person because it was very tumultuous. She was born enslaved in Halifax County, North Carolina in 1838. The reason that we know that she was born in 1838 is not because Lucy knew her own date of birth. It's from this document. So if you see here, it says, oh gosh, I'm going to have to put this down. You might see, step back, Lucy, right here, Lucy was born 10 of April, 1838. Lucy herself did not know her own date of birth. And because of this document, it is a slave inventory, an inventory of property belonging to Amanda Winifred Higgs. It was written in 1846, so Lucy was only about 8 years old. And at this point in Lucy's life, she'd already been in 3 different states, passed around through the different heirs of Reuben Higgs. And Reuben Higgs had 5 children, but at this point, she is the property of Amanda Winifred Higgs, who was herself a minor and an orphan. So to give you a sense of the turmoil that Lucy experienced as a young child, she's separated from her family. She's joined here by siblings Angeline and Aaron, but she's separated from her family, and she's living with a minor heir and the steward of that heir, Samuel Wheelis. And so she doesn't even have consistent adult supervision or guidance or care even, and she is at the service of another young girl. And to add insult to that injury, Amanda passes away within the year of taking ownership of Lucy, and Lucy is transferred again in ownership to another of the heirs. Over the years, the Higgs family battles over who owns Lucy. And this allotment of slaves, another property inventory, was done in 1860. So she's born in 1838, we're now in 1860. And this is when Prudence and Wiley Higgs were fighting over who got to keep the slave property that they had inherited. And you might just be able to see that Lucy and child is written here. So by this point we know Lucy has a child. Her name is Mona. And tragically, she's listed in this sort of listing of property, and each of the people that are enslaved on the Higgs family farm has a value associated with them. And you might notice that Lucy and child are valued at the highest amongst all of them. I'm a teacher, I can't help it, so I'm going to say, why would Lucy and her child be valued at the highest?
You can read.
She cannot read.
No, you're not allowed to read.
That might have been actually not valued.
I would guess that because
What's that? She's a woman, which means she can
Have more children.
she can bear children, right? She's already proven she can bear children. And so she has a child. She can bear a child who is a daughter, right? Who will also be a future bearer of property. And this is especially valuable, not just because it increases their population, which is also increasing their wealth as a family. Not Lucy's wealth, obviously, but the Higgs family wealth. But the banning of the slave trade and the banning of the transatlantic slave trade meant that the only way you could increase your slave property was through procreation. So, there's all of that buried in this one line of a document. There is some belief that maybe Calvin, listed here, was Mona's father. There's not a whole lot of evidence to help us get to that point. It is also convenient for us to believe that Calvin was Lucy's husband, because that means that she got to have a relationship with her husband on the family farm, and that the child that she bore was the product of a happy union. It's also very possible that her husband lived on another property. It's also possible that her enslavers were the father of Mona. So while we like the idea, it makes us maybe more comfortable to say that Calvin was her husband and the father of Mona, we don't really know for sure. The only place that the name of her husband in slavery was mentioned is in an interview some 35 years later, where the name George comes out. There's no evidence of that either. So, interviewers and newspapers get things wrong. Sorry if you're a journalist out there. But so, in any case, we learn a lot about Lucy's life from these documents of her enslavers. Again, the sadness in this is that we don't have any evidence of what Lucy's life was like, the nature of her labor. But we do have some sense that she was probably very skilled. She probably was serving in the home. And there's another reason to believe she might have been serving in the home, and that's because at some point, not too long after this, what's brewing in 1860? This is, Civil War is brewing. But not long after this, Lucy gets wind that she's going to be sold down south. Before I move forward, I'm going to do something a little uncharacteristic, and I'm going to read someone else's work to give us maybe the tone with which we can think about what happens throughout the rest of Lucy's life. So this is a poem by Audre Lorde. I get emotional when I read it, so forgive me. And Audre Lorde is a Black feminist poet, and she talks a lot about generational trauma and how our difficult history, and I say our country's difficult history, but particularly for African Americans, how this history might follow a family. And so as we think about the rest of Lucy's story, because I don't have that perspective in my own family, I looked back at Audre Lorde's poem often as I wrote about Lucy. So, for those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, in the hours between dawns, looking inward and outward at once, before and after, seeking a now that can breed futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hoped to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. When we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive. It's a very powerful poem to help us think about what might have been going through Lucy's mind as she makes her next move. So she's been told she's going to move further south, and as we go through the rest of the talk, I frame it in her acts of survival, because that's what she's doing. She's finding ways to survive and look for a future for herself and for her daughter. So, oh, that's not my book. So being sold further south was a promise of being separated from family, of hard labor, and a lot of change. And young Mona at this time is probably about 3 years old, 2 or 3 years old. And this is what she decides to do next. In the sweltering heat of a Tennessee summer, Lucy swaddled Mona in her gown and snuck away under the cover of night. Long after the lights were extinguished in the home of her enslavers, her brave party of fellow freedom seekers took off on a 3-mile journey under the light of the stars in an ink blue sky. The stars had long provided a celestial roadmap for those escaping bondage on the unofficial routes of the Underground Railroad. From Gray's Creek, through woods, overgrown fields, and hostile territory, they found the Indiana 23rd Volunteer Regiment encamped at the fairgrounds just north of Bolivar, Tennessee. Later reminiscences from nostalgic soldiers inflated Lucy's trek to 30 miles. They arrived, quote, dusty and footsore from the long and hurried journey, according to Major Shadrach Hooper, who recalled the events of Lucy's escape for a newspaper more than 30 years later. So he's telling her story for 30 plus years. Having escaped the plantation and braved the 3-mile journey to arrive at the feet of the Indiana 23rd Regiment, Lucy and the others who escaped with her pleaded for their protection, fearing that her enslaver would kill them. An unidentified man even came to the camp and tried to collect the fugitives. In a slave state in the Deep South, Lucy and her fellow freedom seekers took a great risk in fleeing. They were considered property, and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required that any citizen return slave property to their owners, often for a handsome reward. So Lucy and the folks on Prudence's farm were awfully brave in escaping, and the tumultuous journey that they had to make, they probably knew that they could find the Indiana 23rd Regiment in camp nearby. And they probably knew that this would offer them some safety because maybe Lucy was actually serving in the household and overheard things. But in any case, there was a new kind of loophole that had arisen. So the Union troops realized that the enslaved people in the South were helping the Confederacy. And they were helping the Confederate effort because they had to. They didn't have a choice. So they decided that the enslaved population could be confiscated as contraband of war, kind of like war booty. And because they were property, that allowed them the legal right to take those people and protect them. Now, it seems altruistic, right? It seems like it's all in good faith effort. But in reality, the Union soldiers also wanted the labor of the enslaved people to help their effort. Now, it did offer them the promise of eventual freedom, but in any case, they still were indebted to the soldiers. By all accounts, Lucy and the fellow contraband that joined the Indiana 23rd Regiment had a really great experience. Great, that's a terrible word to say. They had a good experience with the soldiers of the Indiana 23rd Regiment. So this is a correspondent from the troops writing back to the newspaper about what they called them contrabands, right? So that was the word for all of the people who had escaped enslavement and joined the troops, either joining the troop and marching with them or joining one of the contraband camps. But in any case, it is amusing to see the contraband as they go to and from their work on fortifications. There are about 150 or 200, and they march along in 2 ranks following a martial band, consisting of an old snare drum with one head and the hoops cracked, a cane fife, and a pair of bones. Some of them are armed with sticks for guns, and a more jolly crew you never saw. They work well and save the soldiers many a hard day's work. They are very civil and never come around the camps, and I never saw a set of fellows better satisfied. So that is a for the most part, positive response to the contraband that joined the Indiana 23rd, but obviously a lot of them, 150 to 200 people working on behalf of this troop. And most of the responses like that from the Indiana 23rd were positive, and these are some difficult images for which I apologize, but at the same time it's important to see that not all of the contraband were treated with the same respect. Sometimes there were they had this white savior narrative, right, that only those white soldiers could save the poor enslaved person from the caricature of a slave catcher. Or in a more tragic way, that they were expendable tools in the war effort. So the response was not always so kind to the contraband that joined the camps. But in Lucy's case, and this is not from the Indiana 23rd Regiment, but this is one of the groups of contraband, but they were often given the job of washerwomen or as cooks, laundresses, and laborers. And that is the job that Lucy was assigned when she first joined the regiment. So Lucy began serving the regiment and started marching with the troops. And keep in mind, all this time she's got a young child. So she is doing this work while caring for a young person. And thankfully, she probably had others within that group of 150 and 200 people that watched over Mona as well. But she was working laboriously and marching, right? Long marches that she would have followed the troops. But they very quickly recognized that she had skills well beyond what she was doing. And she was quickly scooped up by the surgeon of the troops, Magnus Brucker. And he asked Lucy to serve as his nurse. And he promised her that if she did this, she would be paid for her service. Now, Lucy never appears on any roll for the Indiana 23rd Regiment. And she doesn't appear on the rolls of the Army Nurses Association. So Lucy was never documented as having been a nurse. But there's plenty of evidence that she did, and I'm giving you an image of a white nurse here, but that's because there weren't images of the black nurses helping on the front. But this is a few of the quotes that were later shared about her service as a nurse, and they're quite dramatic. I love them. Her hand often lifted the canteen full of water to the lips of the wounded. Her ear received the last message of the dying, and the soldiers looked upon her in the light of a friend. She shared their hardships and never grumbled, and in their triumphs she was among the happiest. Or to the lips of one sufferer she would place a cup of milk. At another cot she would pause and bathe a feverish forehead, leaving a cooling cloth as she hurried away, while for another soldier there would be a bowl of appetizing broth. How she managed to secure these delicacies, no one cared to ask. She was obviously a very good forager, and that was one of the skill sets that she had. And then my favorite, because it's so dramatic, even as Jeanne d'Arc, or Joan of Arc if you're not a French speaker, even as Joan of Arc loved the sound of battle, this faithful colored woman drew back the wounded and dying and comforting them in their last hours, unmindful of the hail of bullets and crash of artillery. So she was clearly brave, she was loyal, she was industrious, she had all the skills to help them, and again, all while she had little Mona in tow. This is not a full list of the battle sites that Lucy was at, but just to give you a sense of the scope of the battles that she went through and the distance that she covered, all the different states that she was in. She stayed with the Indiana 23rd Regiment through multiple battles. And then we're down here, we're going to get down to what's number 7 here, and that's the siege and surrender in Vicksburg. And this was an important I should also point out, this is the moment too where we come upon the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Important to note here, not only was it the promise of eventual freedom, but it also was when the United States colored troops were established. And this is important because the man who is presumed to be Lucy's husband, Calvin, would eventually join this troop. But we're in Vicksburg, Mississippi at this point, and Lucy is living in conditions that are certainly subpar. It was a very difficult campaign. You can see all the trenches that are built into the hillside, and it was mostly the contraband that would have built the trenches. There was also some very incredibly difficult and dangerous canal work that was done during Vicksburg. And eventually, Union victory comes. The siege of Vicksburg, the surrender of Vicksburg happens, and there's this waiting period between the surrender of Vicksburg and when the troops move on. And this is when Lucy experiences something pretty tragic. Lucy and Mona had survived the escape from enslavement, endured harsh conditions on the front, avoided injury, witnessed ruined cities, slept in wet campsites, and weathered meager supply rations. Through Lucy's industrious, loyal service and tenacious survival, they could see the prospect of freedom in the Emancipation Proclamation and the siege of Vicksburg. The end that could inspire new beginnings was in sight. Alas, between the surrender in July 1863 and February 1864, when the troops left Vicksburg, young Mona, only about 4 years old, died from an exposure incident from camp life. Hopefully, Lucy did not have to watch Mona suffer illness for long. Members of the regiment recalled decades later, quote, "In the siege of Vicksburg, after the city had been captured, our regiment was one of the first to go in and receive surrender, and Aunt Lucy followed in our wake. A short time afterward, her child died. It almost broke the mother's heart. The men, too, had grown to be so fond of Mona, and it was a sincere pang that went through the entire 23rd. Many soldiers from the regiment lined the makeshift gravesite, a trench in the hillside above Vicksburg. Major Hooper said there was an elaborate funeral for the little girl, where many silent figures in blue held the same earth that covered up a portion of Aunt Lucy's heart." So in that reminiscence of this moment, you see the love and attachment that the soldiers had for Lucy, the care that they exhibited towards her, and how her service and care for them built a bond between them that lasted the rest of their lives. After the siege of Vicksburg and the passing of Mona, the Indiana 23rd Regiment was given a requisite furlough. And that furlough allowed them to go home to New Albany for 30 days. And they convinced Lucy to go with them to New Albany to visit. So we're talking just across the river, right? Like a hop, skip, and a jump. This is where we're bringing it home. So Lucy goes to New Albany on furlough, and she could have chosen to stay there, right? Indiana was a free state. It's complicated, right? It's not an easy place to be. There's a lot of difficulty in being there, navigating that. She didn't have much to rely on if she did stay, but she didn't have to go back. But that is what she did. She returned to service with the troops. She continued to serve throughout the entire Civil War. And among the remaining battles was, of course, the Sherman's March to Sea, which was, if you're familiar with that, a pretty brutal slash and burn kind of campaign. She probably witnessed horrific things. And this is in the wake of losing her daughter. And not to mention that it's about this time that Calvin enlisted in the United States Colored Troops, perhaps in response to the passing of Mona. We don't know for sure. But she never did see her husband again after the Civil War. And if it was Calvin, sadly, he did muster out, but they never reunited if it was Calvin that was her husband. But in any case, you can see the long march that if you were one of the contraband, you would follow in line, walking, because you didn't get access to any of the wagons, and you were carrying a lot of the equipment. So she participates in this march, and eventually we get to the end of the Civil War. This seems like an unceremonious way for me to end this, but in any case, we have the fall of Richmond, the surrender at Appomattox, the assassination of President Lincoln, and I think it's really important to know that she's thinking about that while she's also preparing to celebrate the end of the Civil War, because she goes along with the troops to celebrate victory at the Grand Review in Washington, D.C. So there are recounts of this event. It was basically only the white soldiers, the United States colored troops, were not allowed to participate in this. But some of the soldiers of the Indiana 23rd Regiment recount that Lucy was there with them. They say that she marched with them. I suspect that's a little bit of a stretch. I think she probably marched with the contraband at the end or along the sidelines, was watching. But in any case, she was there and she got to celebrate the victory. But it had to have been a victory of mixed feelings, because suddenly she is at this moment where she is going to have to choose. So having endured enslavement, survived the Civil War, and celebrated victory in the Grand Review, Lucy finally had the opportunity to choose what came next, to exert some control over her own destiny. She was no longer bound to the Higgs family or even the Indiana 23rd Regiment. She was faced with a decision. Where would she go if she had no home, no work, no family, and a precarious new future? Precarious new freedom. She could return to Tennessee and seek the assistance of the Freedmen's Bureau, ill-advised, stay in Washington, D.C. with the 40,000 other refugees who remained in the city to work and live in settlements established in abandoned forts, or entrust her freedom to the men of the Indiana 23rd Regiment who encouraged her to return with them to their hometown of New Albany, Indiana. Would she set out to find her remaining relatives, or would she compartmentalize her grief, hoist her resolve, and move forward to begin a new life? And that is what she did. I'm going to share this image with you because it is that sort of idealistic vision of what the future could look like. I suspect that it wasn't that simple and straightforward of a future for Lucy. But she did move to New Albany, Indiana, at the encouragement of the soldiers. And this painting is a beloved painting that is in the collection of the Floyd County Library and what is now the Cultural Arts Center. I'm not sure if it's on view right now, but it is from not too distant of a time from when Lucy moves there. And New Albany is a pretty bustling river town, right? It's got a lot going on. It's got some economy, but it also has gotten really embroiled in Civil War activity. It's got a long history as well as a well-known site of the Underground Railroad. So this is the city to which Lucy begins her new life, or goes to begin her new life. And she works often in the homes of the soldiers with whom she had served. So this is General Gresham, who was not in the Indiana 23rd Regiment, but there's some evidence that she might have served his wife while they were encamped in the same vicinity. Well, she got to know him and clearly made an impression. And he was a rising political star, and so she went to serve in his home. And she was so beloved by that family that later she was invited as an honored guest to General Gresham's daughter's wedding in the lavish Palmer Hotel in Chicago. She was escorted there and was an honored guest. So she started to make friends in high places. There's some evidence that she knew General Grant, that she went to inaugurations of presidents, and really started to build her own independence through serving in the homes of these families. She also got to, for the first time, be a part of a legally binding contract for marriage. So her marriage during slavery was not legally binding, but she met John Nichols after the war in New Albany. She met John Nichols, and this is the home that was mentioned in the oral history interview that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. And this was the home that they purchased together, and sadly it is no longer standing, but we thankfully have some photographic records of the home. It's in the historically black neighborhood of New Albany, and on Nagle Street. So if you're familiar with the area, you can go down Nagle Street and imagine Lucy in that neighborhood. So she finds love, right, with a companion. And John Nichols was also a Civil War veteran, but he was a freeman before the Civil War. She also gets to build a sense of belonging in a community and to join a church. So this is the well-known Second Baptist Church. Now we colloquially call it the Town Clock Church. So if you go to New Albany and you go down Main Street, you can still see this church, which is still a functioning church. It's still the Second Baptist Church. It's the church that she belonged to. You can also see here is at the Frazier, if you go upstairs to the second floor, you can see one of the original clock faces that was on this building. And part of the reason that this is significant is that the Town Clock Church is a known site of the Underground Railroad. So it has a meaningful history in the pursuit of freedom for individuals who were escaping across the river. They could see the clock and the tower across the river, and they knew that they were headed the right direction. So people on this side of the river would be able to see that as a beacon of hope for their escape. In any case, Lucy established a community there, but she also was remarkably invited to be, or appointed, an honorary member of the Grand Army of the Republic. So the Grand Army of the Republic was a veterans group that honored the veterans of the Civil War, the Union veterans of the Civil War. And Lucy was touted as the only Black woman in the country to have been an honorary member of the Grand Army of the Republic. That's not totally true, but it doesn't really matter because the lore was that she was the only one. And that's because she was so beloved by the troops with whom she served. So this is an example of the Sanderson Post ribbon, and you might just be able to see the end of it here and the tassels hanging down in her picture with the veterans. So she was not only an honorary member, but she was like the guest of honor at all of their meetings and all of their activities. If you're not familiar with the history of Memorial Day, Grand Army of the Republic was sort of the inception of that, and Lucy was often the head of the parade on Memorial Day as they would honor the veterans. So she really was beloved. There's newspaper articles all throughout that time about Lucy got honored with a cake, or they gave her a gift, or she was the guest of honor. So she really was continuing to maintain a relationship with the troops with whom she had served. And that was really important because take it back, 20 minutes when I said she never was on a roster for being in the Civil War and never had been documented as a Civil War nurse. Well, when it was possible, the Army Nurses Association in 1892, finally after like a decade or more of advocacy, had established an Army Nurses Association pension, or an Army Nurses pension. Lucy applied for it almost right away. It was less than a month, and this is probably in part because she had that connection to the soldiers in the Grand Army of the Republic, because Lucy didn't have the ability to read or write. So she would have heard news about the Army Nurses pension through the soldiers with whom she had served. So this is her first application, and just to point out that how involved these soldiers were with her future and how loyal they were to her. Lafayette Frederick, who was one of the Grand Army of the Republic members, is one of the attesters to her application. And these applications, it's interesting because they make sure they share with us that she was suffering from different debilities. She had like rheumatism, and she had trouble breathing and other ailments. But they don't often reveal much about Lucy herself. And it doesn't say, they don't say that she was formerly enslaved. They don't say that she was a Black woman. But there's hints at it now that we know in this moment. So this is Lucy's signature, and it says Lucy, her mark with an X in between, Nichols, formerly Higgs. And I read it out loud. This room probably knows how to do cursive, but not everybody does. So it's coming back. But you know, I've said frequently that we don't have Lucy's words. The only mark that we have, the only like physical connection we have to her, is those X's on these documents. That is our only way to really touch something Lucy touched. And I say that because someone once told me that seeing that X there was like she was saying, I'm here. And it's her echo from the past, which I think is really beautiful. We also learn from this, like being listed as formerly Higgs is her only tie to her history of being a slave. So these documents have these little subtle ways of helping us understand Lucy's status.
Did she get her pension?
We'll get there. It takes a minute to get there because it takes 6 years for that pension to happen.
Wow.
But this is, before we get there, you can see this is a letter that was sent to the Senate and House of Representatives, and it was signed by more than 50 of the soldiers with whom she had served. So she maintained an incredibly close relationship with these men. And it's easy to say that the men did it for her, but it's a mutual relationship between them, right? She was tenacious, she sought the help she needed, she kept those relationships going, and she had to keep going back and asking. And that alone took a lot of bravery. I say that it took a minute because this is one page of the different documents that are associated with the pension request. There are 3 pages this long of documents that Lucy and many other soldiers submitted trying to prove that she was actually a Civil War nurse. So you can see here, these are the different rejections. No record found, or rejected and reopened, or claimant not employed as a nurse by proper authority. So these are the kinds of rejections she got over and over and over again. But with some tenacity, Lucy was finally awarded a pension in 1898, $12 a month, and it was awarded by an act of Congress. Yeah, so we'll give Lucy a little round of applause here. Lucy found out, I like to think she found out from Congressman Zenner, who published in the newspaper this letter. Aunt Lucy, and again, a congressman, right? Aunt Lucy, I congratulate you upon this good luck as well as an act of justice for your patriotic service and devotion to your country, and to the boys composing the 23rd, of which you were a nurse, who have rewarded your devotion and kindness to them in their need, in standing by you in your old age and need. I trust you will accept this as evidence of the fact that good deeds and kindnesses bestowed are not without their just recognition in this world. Very truly your friend, W.T. Zenner. So again, friends in high places, right? This is in the newspaper. She was kind of like a celebrity, and that celebrity started to expand. Once Lucy got her pension, news of her pension spread across the entire country, and it spread for like a decade or more. So an example of that is the only other image that we know of Lucy. It is in the Freeman, which was the most popular colored newspaper based in Indianapolis. And this, if you'll look at that, it's 1904, right? That's many years later, and she is labeled as member of the G.A.R. because that was still a big deal. And she's in the newspaper because she fell ill, and they wanted to recognize her again as having gotten a pension, served in the Civil War, and a member of the G.A.R. And this is not unique. It was all over the country, like literally ocean to ocean, that she got recognition and her news spread. I like to believe that she was at, this is just my own hypothesizing, that she was at the dedication of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument in Indianapolis. If you've been there, it's a pretty remarkable monument. And the Grand Army of the Republic was part of whom started this project. And she traveled a lot, and she got to be a part of important things, inaugurations and such. So I feel like maybe she was there and part of that crowd. So I don't know if you can pick her out. Lucy never stopped advocating for herself, and she used the, I guess, celebrity she had in order to do that advocacy. So there is a newspaper article towards the end of her life where she puts in the newspapers that she has expressed an interest in being buried with honors in the National Cemetery in New Albany, Indiana. Again, there had to have been some controversy going on back there that she felt the need to put it in the newspaper. And the irony there is that she was very dedicated to participating in the Memorial Day services that went to this cemetery. In 1910, John Nichols took Lucy on a carriage ride in October, and it's for some reason is in the newspaper. And then in a month later, John Nichols passes away, and he is buried in what the obituaries say is the colored cemetery. The colored cemetery is not the National Cemetery, and he was also a veteran. So John was not buried there. And again, for reasons we don't know. And the colored cemetery is probably a reference to West Haven, which was the most prominent of the colored cemeteries and also the one closest to their home. However, there is no marker for John Nichols's grave there. It wasn't much long after that. Lucy had been ill for quite some time. That Lucy was in a poor asylum in New Albany, and a poor asylum was not like a mental institution the way we use the word asylum now, but more like a place for those who are ailing, who don't have the resources or don't have family to care for them. That's where they would go. Now, she still had the dedication of the soldiers. In fact, at this point, she is her guardian is one of the soldiers with whom she served, and they were there during her funeral. They organized the funeral. The Sanderson Post of the Grand Army of the Republic organized her funeral. She died of old age with certainly a great deal of dignity and care from those around her. We also don't know where Lucy is buried. She is not buried in the National Cemetery either. And there is no grave marker for her. Again, we have assumed that it's West Haven Cemetery, though there are smaller colored cemeteries in New Albany. And sadly, the records for Gwen's undertaking that is mentioned in this were destroyed. I think fire, is that right? Fire? I'm looking at Lucy, Sally. So, you know, tragically, we don't have a way to remember her in her place of burial, and I know that there have been some efforts to be able to get her a grave marker at the National Cemetery, and it's been explained to, I think, Sally and others that if you do not know the location where someone is buried, you cannot then have the gravestone put in at the National Cemetery. But we remember Lucy in different ways, right? And I think her like long-lasting act of survival is to be remembered. And as an art historian, I'm of course interested in the way we remember people through monuments. And there is this one here that is by David Ruckman. It is in the courtyard behind the Underground Railroad. Behind the Town Clock Church, which is the Underground Railroad garden. And it's kind of a narrative one, right? This represents Lucy with Mona swaddled and escaping. In a different way, we've got one that's supposed to be meant to be her likeness that is there by David Ross Stevens. Again, based off of that photograph, it's more of trying to capture the way she looked, right? And it does express that kind of dignified appearance. Personally, I like to see monuments that express something beyond a likeness. And if you're the artist here, not any, negative towards these representational ones, but I love tributes that express something that is not expressed by how someone looks. And I think that William Duffy's sculpture does do that. This is installed in Ivy Tech Sellersburg campus by their library. And it captures that dignity, strength, resilience that you get in that photograph when she's standing in the middle of all of the Civil War soldiers. And I think it's a beautiful representation of who she is more internally than externally. We also remember Lucy through an exhibition that is at the Cultural Arts Center, what used to be the Carnegie Center for Art and History. It is where I was once the director, and I want to acknowledge some folks here who were involved in that organization. So that row right there, just raise your hands and wave. Yeah, they deserve a round of applause. Sally Newkirk was my predecessor and my mentor, and then the other folks there have all served in some capacity on a board and helped to tell Lucy's story for a very long time. I have several folks there went to school children's classrooms and told Lucy's story. We told over 8,000 kids Lucy's story over several years. And so I'm honored to be here with them to help continue to remember Lucy's story. I want to go back and say one thing. Lucy is being remembered, and the whole reason I did this project was mostly because I wanted to make Sally happy and Pam happy. But also because, as Rachel said, I felt compelled to continue telling this story and that she deserved recognition. But I also say that Lucy is remarkable, and she's probably not alone, right? There are other women that were unrecognized. Their stories deserve to be told, and documenting these stories is critical to keep uncovering more. And we just wanted her story to keep growing. And so when I say Lucy's being remembered, I gotta tell y'all, because this blows my mind a little bit, but on Juneteenth this year, I got a notification from a friend that one of the most popular podcasts in the world picked up Lucy's story. So it's going to sound weird, but it's called My Favorite Murder. And that's because they do murder mystery kind of things, but true crime stuff, but they also do survivors in history. And they told Lucy's story incredibly lovingly, and their monthly listeners is 19 million people. So when I say Lucy's story went global, it went truly global. So I feel like my job is done, but I want to keep telling this story and making sure that to encourage everybody else, not only to remember Lucy, but to do this kind of uncovering of stories in any way you can. In your families, talk to people, write stories down, share stories, because it's the only way we can remember, and it's critically important at this moment. So with that, thank you all. I will say, you may purchase my book, no pressure, but any proceeds that go beyond my costs will be donated. I'm working to establish some small, it'll be tiny, you don't do this to be rich, right. But a tiny nursing scholarship at an HBCU to make sure that there is no other person who wants to have a career in nursing that can't do it because they weren't properly under authority. So, thank you all. I believe I have a few moments for questions. Yes. Just project out there. Yes.
New Albany had a relationship in Indiana, much like the relationship that existed between Lexington and Louisville. If you look at westward migration, New Albany was founded in 1820. Until about 1925 or so, it was the largest city and the center of culture and arts in the state of Indiana.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. It is really important to know that New Albany was, in the terms of young people now, bussin'. It was just, it was a place with industry. It did well with steamboats. It really was certainly more important than Indianapolis. And so, yeah, it's very important to note that it was a difficult place in a lot of ways. It had a lot of difficult race relations. But yeah, and it was certainly in competition with Louisville.
Well, what cut it off was the Portland Canal, really.
Yeah.
They developed the Portland
Yeah.
Canal.
Thank you for adding that context to that. Yes?
How did the 23rd feed 150 or 200 contraband?
Not very well. But yeah, I mean, the rations, you know, the contraband would often have to forage for their own food. They got the leftover rations. And as much as the troops would suffer sometimes with their lack of rations, the contraband would as well. But yeah, there was a lot of foraging that happened to make up the difference between what they were given. And they're going to get given, you know, essentially the scraps. Yeah. Yes?
So there are no known relatives today of Lucy?
None that we have found yet.
Wow.
Yeah, because Lucy didn't have any children. I have yet to find, and anybody else who has done this work has yet to find the relatives of Lucy's siblings. I suspect they're out there, and again, telling a story like this and getting it out there might pique someone. I've had a couple of people say, oh, I'm a Higgs, and they've done a little bit of digging and ended up not being related. But yeah, I hope that this is the impetus to uncover some of that. Oh, sorry, okay.
When did her story actually come to light? Do you know the year? Because I've never seen the history books.
Could you
Yeah.
repeat the question, please?
So he asked, when did this story come to light? And so it started with the oral history interview in 1995 and then has been growing since. What year did the exhibition open? 2012, 15? Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. So,
Research that.
and there's been little bits of pockets of like a podcast here, an article there. So yeah, it's been building obviously for 30 years. Yeah. Yes.
Even though a grave marker can't be put on Lucy's grave, a historical marker can be put at the cemetery.
So there is a historical marker for Lucy, but it's not at the cemetery. And I think that we would like to eventually put some kind of monument to her honor in West Haven, where she's likely buried. Yeah, it's a real curious thing because she was quite the local celebrity and beloved, and it's just, I can't quite wrap my head around why both of those grave markers do not exist in a way that we can find them. It's suspicious a little bit.
And I think one.
Oh, yes.
Are you in contact with the Museum of African American History and Culture? I mean, is your work made inroads there? Is it
You
like
mean
the
in
archival
DC?
work? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there is a little bit of contact there. Mostly Pam Peters is in contact with them, so she has been in contact with them to talk about this and maybe some other possibilities. So, yes.
Good.
I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
one final one, if you don't mind.
Please.
I'll do this because I know people.
It makes it easier. So when I've done stories with Ed Hamilton and when he's doing the sculpting work, he feels like his works speak to him, that they make a connection. So when you look at her now, at the end of writing this, do you feel that connection with Lucy? And when you, I mean, because you look at that face and you just see this tower of strength. Tell me about that and what you see now when you look at her.
That's a great question. I think I do see a lot of what Duffy saw in this really incredible strength, dignity, and beauty, and resolve. Yeah, I feel connected to her in a way, but I say that cautiously. I can't know her. I feel I feel so connected to her, and so like I've got this piece of absence where I don't know who she was and how she felt, and it feels like I need to sit down with her in a rocking chair and hear her tell me her stories. And I think that's what's most compelling about it, is that I don't feel satisfied with what I've done, even though, you know, I wrote the book. And I've thought about what her existence is like, and I've thought through the lens of other people, but I want to know her. So yeah, it's a challenging kind of connection, but also distance, where it's through objects and letters and other people's words, and I just wish I knew her. Yeah.
Round of applause. Eileen's book, we're going to have her go to the Welcome Center. That's where you all first came in.